In a quiet American suburb where every house looked the same and every smile felt rehearsed, the Carter family believed they were living the American dream. A warm home, honest work, and the simple hope that tomorrow would be better than today. That was enough for them. Daniel Carter was a man who trusted the system. He believed that in America, truth eventually wins, and hard work protects you. His wife believed in family dinners, open windows, and teaching their son that right and wrong were not flexible ideas. But power doesn't respect innocence. One refusal, one no spoken to the wrong people. That was all it took to turn their peaceful life into a warning. Fire doesn't just burn houses, it erases futures. That night, as flames swallowed their home and sirens arrived too late, the Carter family learned a cruel truth. Justice is slow, but violence is immediate. And while the city slept, a single survivor walked out of the smoke carrying more than scars. He carried a promise. Because in a country built on laws, some stories are still written in blood, and this one had only just begun. They called it a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Maplewood Lane slept early. Porch lights glowed softly, windows went dark one by one, and the Carter house blended in perfectly. Just another family, living the American dream.
But dreams don't scream when they die.
Daniel Carter believed in the system. He believed that honesty still mattered, that laws existed to protect people like him. He built his construction business slowly, brick by brick, refusing shortcuts, refusing bribes. In a city that rewarded silence, Daniel chose truth. That choice was noticed. 3 days before the fire, Daniel sat in a glass office high above New York. A folder slid across the table. Fake reports. Illegal shortcuts. Blood hidden behind signatures. Daniel closed the folder.
He said no.
Power does not forgive refusal. The warnings came quietly at first. A phone call in the dark, a car parked too long across the street, a photograph left at the door. Fear knocked, but Daniel didn't open the door. He believed fear was a bluff. He was wrong. That night, the house was still.
Too still.
At 2:17 a.m., silence exploded. Fire tore through the back of the house like an animal unleashed. Walls cracked. Glass shattered. Smoke swallowed the halls before anyone could breathe. Laura screamed their son's name. Daniel ran into the fire without hesitation. Because fathers don't calculate risk. They just move. Ethan woke up choking, lungs burning, eyes blind with smoke. He felt hands pull him, heard a voice shout, felt the heat closing in. Run. One word, one command, one goodbye. Flames separated them. A ceiling collapsed. Screams disappeared into fire. Ethan stumbled outside as neighbors screamed and sirens arrived too late. He fell onto the cold grass, watching the only home he'd ever known turn into ash. Firefighters fought the flames. Police took notes. By morning, everything was gone. By noon, it was called an accident. But accidents don't make threats. Accidents don't leave warnings. Ethan understood something that night, something no one had taught him. Justice doesn't come to everyone. At the hospital, a detective promised answers. His eyes avoided Ethan's. Promises are easy in quiet rooms. That night, as machines hummed and the city slept, a boy disappeared. In his place, something colder remained. Something that remembered. Because when fire takes everything from you, it doesn't just leave scars. Sometimes, it leaves purpose. The system didn't know what to do with Ethan Carter. Files were opened.
Forms were signed.
Boxes were checked. And just like that, a life was reduced to paperwork. They called it placement. Ethan called it disappearance. One morning, he was a son with a home. The next, he was a case number riding in the back of a government car, watching the city slide past a dirty window. No one asked what he remembered. No one asked what he saw. Because grief is inconvenient. The foster home was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, just empty. Ethan learned quickly that silence was safer than questions. Safer than memories. He stopped talking. Not because he couldn't, but because words felt useless. At night, fire came back. In dreams, in smells, in the way shadows moved across walls. He woke up gasping, hands clenched, heart racing, reliving a night that never ended. The counselors called it trauma. Ethan called it fuel. Years passed. One foster home became another. Different faces. Same distance. Some were kind. Most were temporary. No one stayed. So Ethan learned to rely on something else. Memory. He remembered his father's voice.
Come.
Firm. Unbreakable. Right and wrong aren't opinions, son. Those words stayed with him. And slowly, quietly, they began to change. At school, Ethan became invisible, not weak, not loud, just present enough to be ignored. Teachers saw potential. Students saw nothing. That was exactly how he wanted it. Because invisible people see everything. He listened. He observed. He learned how power moved through hallways, through systems, through lies that wore expensive suits. By 17, he understood something important. Truth alone doesn't win. Preparation does. When Ethan turned 18, the system released him. No goodbye. No ceremony. Just a bus ticket and a thin envelope with his documents inside. Freedom, according to the state. Ethan walked out with nothing and everything. He worked nights, studied days, slept little. Community college first. Law books borrowed, not bought. Finance textbooks filled with handwritten notes. He didn't chase grades. He chased understanding. How contracts were broken. How companies hid money. How men like Richard Hale stayed untouchable. At the same time, Ethan trained his body. Not for strength, for control. Boxing gyms where no one asked questions. Self-defense classes taught by men who'd seen real violence. He learned how to fall without breaking. How to hit without rage. Rage wastes energy.
Control sharpens it.
One night, standing alone in a gym locker room, Ethan made a decision. Ethan Carter was dead. That name belonged to ashes. He chose a new one. Evan Cross. A name with no history. No emotion. No past to trace. With it, he stepped into a different world. University followed. Scholarships earned quietly. Professors impressed by focus, not charm. Evan spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. He learned the language of influence, how to ask questions that sounded harmless and extracted everything. Years passed. Richard Hale's name appeared often in Evan's research. Always successful. Always clean. Always just outside the reach of consequences. Evan followed the money. Shell companies. Offshore accounts. Political donations disguised as charity. Patterns that didn't show on the surface. He didn't rush. Revenge, he knew, was a long game. At 26, Evan was invited into rooms most people never saw. Investor meetings. Private dinners. Conversations held behind closed doors. No one recognized him. Why would they? The fire had erased him. Sometimes, alone at night, Evan wondered what his parents would think of the man he was becoming. That thought hurt more than the memories. But doubt didn't stop him. It sharpened him. He wasn't building anger anymore. He was building a weapon. And weapons don't feel. They wait. There comes a moment when revenge stops feeling powerful. Not because it disappears, but because it stands right in front of you, waiting to be chosen. Evan Cross had imagined this moment for years. The room was dark, quiet, sealed off from the rest of the city. Richard Hale sat alone behind his desk, older now, slower, a man who had never believed consequences would ever knock on his door. But they had, just not in the way he expected. Evan stood in the shadows, unseen. The security system was disabled. The guards had been redirected. The city outside continued breathing, unaware that a life could end in this room without a sound. In Evan's hand was a gun. Not shaking. Not heavy. Just present. This was the ending fire had promised him. One pull. One moment. And the screams would finally stop. Hale looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered. Not memory, but instinct. The instinct predators develop when they realize they are no longer alone. Who are you? Hale asked. Evan didn't answer. Because names didn't matter anymore. Hale laughed nervously, reaching for confidence the way he always had. You think you can threaten me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Evan stepped forward. You're right, he said quietly. You never did. Hale's smile faded. In that silence, Evan felt it, the weight of every night, every memory, every unanswered question. This was the moment revenge had been training him for. But something else stood in the way. His father's voice. Not loud, not accusing, just steady. Right and wrong aren't opinions, son. Evan realized then what revenge truly wanted. It didn't want justice. It wanted him. It wanted his future, his sleep, his humanity. Killing Hale would be easy. Living after would not. Evan lowered the gun. Hale exhaled, relieved, misunderstanding mercy for weakness. That mistake would cost him more than his life ever could. Evan turned away. Not because Hale deserved mercy, but because Hale deserved exposure. Within 48 hours, everything collapsed. Anonymous files reached federal hands. Financial records, audio recordings, video proof,
Names. Dates.
bodies disguised as accidents. The media exploded. Hale development stock crashed. Executives fled. Politicians denied knowing him. Richard Hale was arrested at dawn. Cameras captured his confusion, the disbelief of a man who had never been judged. In prison, power evaporates. All that remains is memory. And enemies. The same network Hale once controlled turned on him. Protection vanished. Favors expired. Justice, delayed but inevitable, arrived wearing a familiar face. Hale didn't survive his sentence. The system called it an internal incident. Evan called it balance. He watched the news from a distance alone. No smile. No celebration. Just quiet. Because revenge doesn't end with victory. It ends with release. Evan walked away from the screen, carrying nothing with him. Not anger. Not guilt.
Just a choice he could live with.
After the noise faded, after the headlines stopped screaming, silence returned. Not the frightening kind, but the kind that waits for you to speak first. Evan Cross disappeared from the city, the same way he had entered it. No farewell. No announcement. Just an empty apartment and a life folded neatly into a single suitcase. Success followed him like a shadow he refused to acknowledge. But unfinished stories have a gravity of their own. Months later, Evan returned to Maplewood Lane. The street looked smaller now. Older. The houses stood untouched, pretending nothing had ever happened there. Children rode bicycles past a place where fire once erased a family. The Carter house was gone. In its place, an empty lot, quiet, fenced, forgotten. Evan stepped onto the land slowly, as if the ground itself might recognize him. This was where laughter had lived, where dinners had been shared, where a future once waited. He knelt near the back of the lot, drawn by instinct more than memory. And there it was, a small, rusted metal box buried beneath the soil. Inside, a letter. Time had yellowed the paper, but the handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. Evan sat down and read. If you are reading this, it means I failed to protect you the way a father should. But listen to me carefully. The world will test you. It will try to turn pain into poison. Do not let it. Stand for what is right, even when it costs you. Especially then. Evan's hands trembled. Not from anger.
From release.
For the first time in years, he cried, not like a broken boy, but like a man finally allowed to feel. The fire had taken his family, but it hadn't taken their voice. Evan folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his jacket. Some things don't belong to the past. As the sun set over Maplewood Lane, Evan stood and walked away. He didn't look back, because revenge had given him direction. Justice had given him freedom. And memory would give him peace. In the end, there were no celebrations, no courtroom applause, no victory speeches, no moment where the world stopped to acknowledge what had been taken or what had been restored. The world rarely does. Evan Cross became another name that quietly drifted out of relevance. The media moved on. New scandals replaced old ones. Justice, once delivered, stopped being interesting. But justice was never meant to be loud. It was meant to be final. Evan carried no proof of what he had done, because proof was for those who needed recognition. He needed something else.
Peace.
He traveled without destination, through cities that didn't know his face and places that asked no questions. Some nights were easy. Others were not. Memory has its own timing, and grief does not respect borders. But it no longer controlled him. The fire that once defined his existence had burned itself out. In its place, something steadier remained, not hope, not happiness, but balance. And balance was enough. Somewhere in the silence, Evan understood a truth his father had lived by. Power can destroy lives. Revenge can consume them. But choice defines them. He chose not to become a monster wearing justice as a mask. He chose not to let violence be his legacy. He chose to end the story without creating another beginning built on blood. The Carter family would never return. But they would never be forgotten. Their names would not appear in history books. Their faces would not hang in courthouses. Yet their impact lived on, in one man's refusal to surrender his humanity. As Evan walked forward, carrying nothing but memory and meaning, the past loosened its grip. Some wounds don't heal.
They teach.
And some stories don't end with revenge. They end with understanding.